Good morning and welcome to our study of the book of Esther. This day brings us to chapter 3. And I will invite you to read along with me in a little bit as we go through different sections, paragraphs of the chapter. And I'll be reading from the New American Standard Updated Edition. In chapter 3, the plot of the narrative that occupies the rest of the book begins to take form. The king elevates a man named Haman to the position of great prominence. And Haman learns that Mordecai the Jew shows him no respect. And so he determines that he'll destroy all the Jews. In the first month of the king's 12th year, after deciding on a date for the massacre by casting the lot or the pur, Haman receives permission from King Ahasuerus to issue the edict. All Jews were to be killed on the 13th day of the 12th month of that year. The rest of the book reveals how the Jews were saved from that catastrophic fate. Notice first of all in verse 1, Haman's promotion. After these events, King Ahasuerus promoted Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, and advanced him and established his authority over all the princes who were with him. Before continuing with the narrative, the writer tells us how Haman becomes prime minister, as you've just heard read. After these events, verse 1 begins with that phrase, after these events, or after these things. It indicates an indefinite period of time. The events related in this chapter and those that follow must have occurred several years after the ones recorded in chapter 2. Esther became queen in the 7th year of Ahasuerus, about 479 BC. And the edict authorizing the slaughter of the Jewish people was issued in the 12th year of the king, about 5 years later, which would be roughly 474 BC. And the story in this context was initiated by what would seem to be a relatively insignificant event, the elevation of one of the king's servants, Haman, to the post of prime minister. This promotion established his authority, the text says, over all the other princes with him. The phrase established his authority, literally rendered, would be set his seat. Haman is identified as the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, and who is otherwise unknown. This identification has led to the belief that Haman was the descendant of Agag, the Amalekite king, whom Saul failed to kill when God had commanded him to destroy all the Amalekites in 1 Samuel 15. If Haman descended from Agag, the king who was, in a sense, the one that cost Saul his kingdom, then the conflict between him and Mordecai may have stemmed from that historical occurrence. Folks in that part of the world tend to have long memories. And this seems likely if Mordecai was related to Saul in some way, biologically related. Another view is that the term Agagite was not used to say Haman had literally descended from Agag, but rather to remind the readers of the enmity, the hostility that had constantly existed between the Amalekites and the Jews. Haman need not have been genetically descended from Agag in order for this animosity to exist between them. Agag, or Agagite, if I'm pronouncing it anywhere close to correctly, is a term used by the writer that characterizes Haman as an anti-Semite. He's anti-Semitic, that is to say, he is an enemy of the Jews, an avowed enemy. Then it is added that the original readers would have understood, or I'm adding that idea, that they would have understood this one clue as to point to the age-old conflict between Israel and the powers that were out to destroy her. Others have thought that the word has nothing to do with the historical Agag, but rather refers to a city or a district in Persia. Well, whatever the exact circumstances, Haman was an enemy of God's people just as Agag had been. In verses 2 through 6, we see how that all blows up and becomes a terrible threat to the Jewish people because Mordecai refuses to honor Haman. All the king's servants who were at the king's gate bowed down and paid homage to Haman, for so the king had commanded concerning him. But Mordecai neither bowed down nor paid homage. Then the king's servants who were at the king's gate said to Mordecai, "Why are you transgressing the king's command?" Now it was when they had spoken daily to him, and he wouldn't listen to them, that they told Haman to see whether Mordecai's reason would stand. For he had told them that he was a Jew. When Haman saw that Mordecai neither bowed down nor paid homage to him, Haman was filled with rage, but he disdained to lay hands on Mordecai alone, for they had told him who the people of Mordecai were. Therefore Haman sought to destroy all the Jews, the people of Mordecai, who were throughout the kingdom of Ahasuerus. Haman's promotion did not in itself create a problem for the Jews. Nevertheless, one Jew did cause trouble by refusing to acknowledge Haman's authority, his ascendancy. In verse 2, an aside to Haman's rise to power was that all the king's servants were required to honor him, to acknowledge that. Probably this included officials of the government as well as servants in the king's household. All who were present at the king's gate, the entrance to the palace where visitors came and went, and much official business was conducted, bowed down and did obeisance to Haman, but not Mordecai. The idea of paid homage literally means they prostrated themselves before, as if in an act of worship. The king himself had commanded that the people pay homage to Haman. One person refused. One person would not obey that command, Mordecai the Jew. And since Mordecai was introduced to the reader in chapter 2, verses 5 through 7, as Jewish, and a cousin and guardian of Esther the queen, the writer doesn't here bother to identify him further in this context. Neither was there any need to explain Mordecai's being at the king's gate, for this was the place that he would go to learn about Esther's well-being and see how she was doing. And many people look at this and they hold up his actions as a good example to imitate. However, Mordecai may simply have been incorrect in his assumptions about bowing down before Haman. Haman himself did not, in verse 3, immediately notice the insubordination of Mordecai, but the king's servants who were at the gate did. And they asked him why it was that he was transgressing the king's command in this way. In verse 4, no doubt these men are trying to persuade Mordecai to change his behavior, and so they speak to him about that every day. Mordecai would not submit to them, so they report his noncompliance to Haman, perhaps asking whether or not Mordecai's reason for refusing to bow down was acceptable to him. While the writer didn't specify the reason for the behavior, it obviously had something to do with Mordecai's Jewish ethnicity. The text connects Mordecai's reason with the fact that he had told them that he was a Jew. Why would being a Jew prevent Mordecai from honoring Haman? No answer to that question is readily available. The law of Moses forbade bowing down to an idol, but it didn't forbid bowing down to earthly kings. And the Old Testament contains many examples of God's people bowing down before rulers and others who are in authority. It has been suggested that the animosity between the Jews and the Amalekites was behind Mordecai's refusal. In other words, he's unwilling to honor an ancient foe. Another possibility is that Mordecai believed that Haman was presenting himself as a god. And so he equates bowing before Haman in that circumstance with worshiping a false god. Interpreters have shared the view that Mordecai was avoiding giving glory that only God deserves to Haman, a mere man. And they use Mordecai's refusal as a worthy example to imitate. But Mordecai may simply have been mistaken, because we know that in other places in the Old Testament, the people bowed before the king. They showed the proper respect. So he may have been wrong about what he concluded. Mordecai's behavior may only reveal that he did what his conscience required him to do. Again, we have to remember that the writer, in telling the story, neither condemned nor commended Mordecai. He's simply reporting what took place. Verse 5, when Haman learned about Mordecai's disrespect, he flew into a rage. Perhaps knowing the nature of man, we can understand his reaction. Whether or not we approve of it, we wouldn't approve of it. But nobody likes to experience disrespect. And one who has been recently elevated to the highest appointed position in the kingdom, Haman was likely to be filled with pride and especially sensitive to slights from those beneath his station. In verse 6, however it happened, what takes place next is in no sense understandable. Such a reaction by Haman could not be anticipated by the reader. He disdained, or literally despised in his eyes, to punish Mordecai alone for this wrongdoing. Instead, he determines that he'll destroy all the Jews throughout the entire kingdom. Mordecai would, of course, be included in the massacre, but so would thousands upon thousands of other Jews who had shown Haman no disrespect. Just as the writer said nothing about Mordecai's motivations, he continued without explaining Haman's justification for his unreasonable, over-the-top plan. Surely Haman could have punished Mordecai on the spot. Why did he choose not to do so? Did he think he was so great that he couldn't stoop so low as to kill just one man? Is that what drove him? Did he believe that the only way the crime of disrespecting him could be atoned was for thousands of executions to occur? Haman could be branded a sociopath, a murderous egomaniac, or we could simply say that Haman demonstrates the terrible consequences of overriding pride. Michael V. Fox thought so. He said, Haman is simply driven by pride and the hostility that such pride engenders. Haman's scheme to destroy the Jews is presented in chapter 3, in verse 7 through 11. In the first month, which is the month of Nisan, in the 12th year of King Ahasuerus, Pur, that is, the lot, was cast before Haman from day to day and from month to month until the 12th month, and that is the month of Adar. Then Haman said to King Ahasuerus, there is a certain people scattered and dispersed among the peoples in all the provinces of your kingdom. Their laws are different from those of all other people, and they do not observe, I should say, the king's laws. So it is not in the king's interest to let them remain. If it is pleasing to the king, let it be decreed that they be destroyed, and I will pay 10,000 talents of silver into the hands of those who carry on the king's business to put into the king's treasuries. Then the king took his signet ring from his hand and he gave it to Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, the enemy of the Jews. And the king said to Haman, the silver is yours, and the people also, to do with them as you please. Verse 7, having decided what to do, namely to kill all the Jews, Haman determines how to get that done and when to get it done. The pur, that is the lot, was brought to Haman. It was designed to reveal the best time to carry out his plans. The lot was used as a means of reaching a fair and impartial decision in their way of thinking and to discover the will of God. In the case of Haman, in Persia, using lots was a way of determining the will of his gods, because he's a pagan. The Purim served much the same purpose as a pair of dice would serve today, or flipping a coin. It was not viewed by them, however, as just a matter of chance, the way we would see it, because people in the ancient world didn't associate that with chance. They believed the results of the pure were always controlled by the deities that they worshiped, the gods that they worshiped. Haman then was seeking from his gods the most favorable time to exterminate the Jews. Apparently, the first month of Nisan, that is March to April, was at least in Babylonian thought the time of the year for determining destinies. The lot was cast at this time to decide the exact date and to enact Haman's plan. The New American Standard Bible suggests that the lots were cast from day to day and from month to month until a positive answer was given. However, many versions indicate that the lots were cast in one setting to select the day and the month. The REB says that this was accomplished by taking the days and the months one by one. As the lots were cast, Haman probably asked the question, is this a good day? Is this a good month to destroy the Jews? And either a no answer, a negative answer, must have been given for each throw until the lot finally provides an affirmative answer. The lot finally fell on the 12th month of Adar, that's February to March. And the same must have occurred for the 13th day, although that's not found in the text. Why did Haman choose a date 11 months later to kill the Jews? Why would he not get permission from the king to immediately begin to slaughter Jews? Perhaps he thought it was necessary to plan the attack for several months in advance because the methods of communication in the ancient world took time. They're relatively slow by modern standards. The casting of lots indicates that he was either superstitious or a true believer in his gods. And he probably wanted the blessing of the gods on his actions and thought the best way to get that would be to allow them to choose the date for the killing of his enemies. In verse 8, after telling when Haman intended to destroy the Jews, the writer explains how he would carry out this purpose. As the king's prime minister, he had ready access to King Ahasuerus. They communicated, no doubt, probably on a daily basis or nearly so. So he asked to the king if he would grant permission to enact his plan. And he sought to persuade the king by using two approaches. To begin with, he portrays the Jews as a serious threat to the law and order within the kingdom. And he told Ahasuerus about these people who posed this grave danger to peace and tranquility in the empire. And what he said about them was a clever combination of truth and lies. Haman said there is a certain people scattered and dispersed among the peoples of all the provinces of your kingdom. And that statement is true. It's absolutely factually true. And it is a good depiction of the Jews' situation at about 475 BC in Persia. He told Ahasuerus their laws are different from those of all other people. That statement is also true. And the Jews would have been gratified to know that the Gentiles had recognized that their law, the law of Moses, was different from all other laws. The Jews' observance of the law was noticeable because of some of the ordinances, especially the food and worship laws. And it resulted in the Jews not fully assimilating into the societies where they found themselves. The prime minister said they do not observe the king's laws. Now that accusation is a lie. It's not true. Haman might have been justified in saying Mordecai broke one of the king's laws, but certainly it is unfair and irrational for him or anybody else to say that the Jews in general did not obey the laws under which they live. You know, anytime people start characterizing a whole group, a whole ethnicity, a whole community of people is, you know, white people are this way, or black people are that way, or Latinos are this or that, you can know that that's not accurate, because those are large communities that contain millions of people, and they have different attitudes and ideas and political philosophies and what have you, just like your folks do. And so what he tells here is just an absolute lie, and he should have known it if he didn't. Esther is written in part to refute the accusation that the Jews were disobedient. Of course, Haman is not concerned about the truth of the charge. He's concerned about that charge getting him to a position to be able to do what he's determined he's going to do. Haman concludes with a fourth comment, so it is not in the king's interest to let them remain. Again, he's making a false statement. Mordecai's actions in chapter 2, verses 19 through 23, when he saved the king by revealing a plot to assassinate him, indicate that the Jews were valuable in the kingdom, valuable to Ahasuerus. He wouldn't be alive if it weren't for a Jew. Verse 9, having presented his case, in the second part of his approach, Haman implies that the destruction of the Jews provided an opportunity for the king to gain great, great wealth, even above what he has. He said, let it be decreed, literally, let it be written that they be destroyed. Then he promised the king 10,000 talents of silver. That's an enormous sum, said to be equivalent to 2/3 of the annual budget of the entire government of the Persian Empire. If you'll just issue this decree, he said, that's coming to you. Though the text doesn't make it clear, Haman's promise of silver would probably not come out of his own accounts. Rather, it would be confiscated from the Jews when they were attacked and murdered. Even so, this vast sum must indicate that Haman was a wealthy man, and his proposition would have been ludicrous if he'd not had access to a great deal of money. The money would be taken from those who carried out the bloody deed and eventually put into the king's treasuries. Two facts seem obvious from this offer. Number one, at least some of the Jews who were to be attacked were wealthy people. They must have been known to be wealthy, otherwise Haman could not have offered the bribe so confidently. Secondly, Haman was aware that the king could be influenced by the offer of silver. In this transaction, neither man had pure motivations. Neither one of them, regardless of what they might have said at the time. Haman was motivated by pride, hatred, and vengeance. But he tried to make the king believe that he was thinking only of the welfare of the empire. The king would have liked for others to think that he was concerned only about order in his kingdom. But it was really money that he was after, and Haman knew it. In verse 10, after hearing about 10,000 talents of silver, the king is now convinced. And so he takes off his signet ring, the symbol of his authority, and he gives it to Haman. And with that ring in his possession, Haman could do whatever he chooses to do with the king's authority. The signet ring was a symbol of Roman authority, not Roman, but royal authority in ancient times, and was used instead of a written signature to officially seal documents. And using the same words as you see in chapter 3 and verse 1, the writer again refers to Haman as the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, but this time he adds the words, the enemy of the Jews. The king informed Haman that he could keep the money for himself. Writers say that probably was not sincere, but rather it was employing a cultural bargaining technique. He said, the silver is yours, later the silver is given to you, but by the tone of voice, he would have let Haman know that he would be glad to add that money to his treasury. Carrie A. Moore thought that the king accepted the money, possibly bargaining with Haman in the same way that Abraham bargained with Ephron in the field of Machpelah in Genesis 23. The king also said that Haman could treat the people, that is the Jews, however he wanted to treat them. And Haman had achieved his purpose, and with the authority of the king, he could have the Jews throughout the empire destroyed. Haman's proclamation then is recorded in verses 12 through 15. Then the king's scribes were summoned on the 13th day of the first month, and it was written just as Haman commanded the king's satraps, to the governors who were over each province, and to the princes of each people, each province according to its script, each people according to its language, being written in the name of King Ahasuerus and sealed with the king's signet ring. Letters were sent by couriers to all the king's provinces to destroy, to kill, and to annihilate all the Jews, both young and old, women and children, in one day, the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar, and to seize their possessions as plunder. A copy of the edict to be issued as law in every province was published to all peoples, so that they should be ready for this day. The couriers went out, impelled by the king's command, while the decree was issued at the citadel in Susa, and while the king and Haman sat down to drink. The city of Susa was in confusion. So the chapter concludes by telling how the king's edict was published and sent throughout the empire. In verse 12, on the 13th day of the first month, the king's scribes are summoned to put the decree in writing, put pen to paper. This was 11 months prior to the date that Haman intended to carry out this extermination. The decree was addressed to all the leaders of the empire, from the greatest, the king's satraps, to the least, the princes or the local officials. Two facts about the edict are emphasized. It was sent all over the empire, that is, to each province with its script and in the language of the people, and would therefore affect all Jews everywhere. Secondly, though written by Haman, it was published in the king's name and sealed with his signet ring. It had the force of a royal, unchangeable law. Verse 13, the decree was sent by couriers to all the king's provinces. And this portrayal of an effective postal system in the Persian Empire occurs with what is found in chapter 1:22, and the same system is mentioned again in chapter 8, verses 10 and 14. The content of the decree and the details of its publication are given next. The new law stated that on the 13th day of the 12th month, all Jews, young and old, including women and children, are to be destroyed. The decree includes 3 words for the slaughter that was being authorized. Enemies of the Jews would be permitted to destroy, to kill, and to annihilate them. Deeply affected by this news, Esther would later plead with her husband, "We have been sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, to be killed, to be annihilated." You'll see that in chapter 7 and verse 4 Further, the Jews' goods were to be plundered, and those who killed them could seize their possessions as plunder. The prospect of acquiring wealth made this an attractive proposition to a bunch of pagans. In verse 14, the edict did not specify who was responsible for the genocide. Since the writer said the decree was issued in every province to all peoples, the invitation to join in murderous slaughter of the Jews was evidently being offered to everyone. In view of the events of chapter 9, the reader can infer that the invitation was accepted by the Jews' enemies. There was hostility brewing, obviously, in the empire, and the Jews were subject to hatred and malice on the part of a number of the people. Throughout the empire, the Jews and their enemies prepared for the coming fateful day, the 13th of Adar, which had been chosen by the casting of the Pur. Verse 15, from looking to the distant borders of the kingdom, the writer returned to focus on the capital of Susa. There, too, the decree was published, causing great confusion to erupt. This confusion must have resulted from the prominence of the Jews in the city, regarded as good citizens. And the rest of the people of Susa must have wondered, well, why would an edict like that be issued? The account concludes with an ironic note. While the rest of the city was in confusion, the king and Haman were peacefully enjoying themselves, drinking together in the palace. Their friendship at this point sets forth a sharp contrast with what is going to happen between them at the end of this story. And I hope you'll stay with us until that time. God bless you this day.